Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this rip of TFTC. Thank you for joining us. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you catch us on podcast apps, make sure you subscribe there. Give us a rating, a review. Go to tftc.io as well. Become a member of the site. Join the conversation. Truth for the commoner, trying to get you the high signal content in a world gone mad. This rip was brought to you by our good friends at River. River's here to make it as easy as possible for you to buy Bitcoin and then take it into self-custody. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today, and you'll get $5 of Bitcoin after you buy $100 worth of Bitcoin on River. You can dollar cost average into Bitcoin with no fees. If you're just buying one off, River has the best fees in the industry. They back all their Bitcoin reserves 1-to-1 in multi-sig cold storage. They highly recommend that you take self-custody. They just introduced limits. So if you want to set a limit order below or above the current Bitcoin price, River makes that extremely easy as well. They also have real customer support. You can pick up the phone and call them if you have any questions about your experience on River. So go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. Enjoy this rip. Axel, welcome to the show, number one.
Thank you.
Number
Thank
two.
you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, because I think the content that you're putting out, I think I discovered you on Twitter. It had to be around Thanksgiving, maybe after you started your TikTok. Some people listen to the show were tagging me in the videos that you were doing about the economy and the state of the world as it is today. And since then, I started following you on Twitter, watching your videos, and I think you're putting out some of those high signal content in terms of speaking to the common man about the problems that exist within our economy, particularly here in the United States. And I really just want to have you on the show to shoot the shit about all this, because it's pretty fucked up beyond belief. This is a Bitcoin podcast. Mm-hmm. I've seen you've been talking about Bitcoin a lot recently, particularly the fact that the fiat system is a complete scam and people don't realize it. And it is undermining the ability of an individual to actually live a life of quality at this particular point in time.
Yeah, when I started working on this idea, it was inspired by Bitcoin. Well, more specifically, hard currency. So for me, years ago, right before 2008, before 2008 happened, anybody who was in business at the time saw kind of what was coming. If we were paying attention, there's no way this is sustainable, what was happening. And then when the banks got bailed out, this created, and of course, as you know, the history as far as Bitcoin came about. And at the time, I didn't understand any of it, because not that I didn't understand hard currency, but because the person who described Bitcoin to me in early 2010, I think, so right at the beginning when Bitcoin was like 50 cents or something like that, had told me, check the way he described it was this. You're going to think this is comical, but he says, man, this was it's like this really cool thing, and it's like a stock. And the way he described it, and I'm like, I'm not interested, because of the way he had explained it to me. And he kind of made it sound like the Hollywood Stock Exchange, where it was kind of arbitrary. And I said, well, I'm kind of, I blew it off. But my talking about this was inspired by actually an old friend of mine who he quit voting, and he wanted nothing to do with politics or voting or anything. He says, listen, man, I don't even want to hear it. He says, until you fix the money issue, I don't want to hear anything from anybody ever again about any of this stuff, because none of this is going to be long-term solution until that gets addressed. And he's right. And that kind of germinated in my mind for well, really for a long time. And it was later on that I decided to put it into a Fibonacci sequence, or use a Fibonacci sequence that's distorted to explain what he was trying to explain, because he kept saying, that like, and this was a younger friend of mine. He was very perceptive, and like me, a high school dropout, the whole bit, but he understood all of this, and that was what inspired this. So later on, that's when I decided to actually start doing this. And it became an outgrowth, like you mentioned, with the podcast that started off as a newsletter. It was me trying to explain this to a handful of people, and then constantly having to re-explain the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah. And that's what we have it right outside the studio here in, what's that, a neon sign, fix the money, fix the world. I think all the problems that you talk about on your videos, like really the stem of them, the root of these problems, not the stem, the root is the fact that we've completely fucked up the money, and it's created these massive ripple effects of negative externalities, whether it's the inability of millennials to go and actually make enough money to build a sustainable lifestyle, the ability of, not the ability of, but it's completely corrupted the real estate market, which you talk a lot about, and then it's leading to a massive competency crisis, which is putting the state of the economy in a very precarious situation.
Perhaps one of my favorite videos, actually. I mean, I don't have a favorite because I frankly, I hate watching myself. So
I'm the same way.
When I edit this stuff, I cringe when I edit things, but I know that other people see them and they say, no, this is really good. And so I just take their word for it and leave it. But yeah, the competency crisis video that I had done, which I'm sure you've seen, that I reposted it, in fact, on Twitter, I think 2 days ago. And I want to just point that out, really hammer that home, that this is going to get worse if we don't address this problem. And, I don't see how this is going to be addressed until we actually start working with the money itself.
And so to describe the competency problem to people who are unaware of it, what is happening right now in terms of people can actually get things done, not doing them?
So if I were to explain it this way, to try and encapsulate the competency crisis, when you have your currency breaking down, it leads to the overall breakdown of the division of labor. And without division of labor, the default setting of humanity is really quite terrible. And it's because the reason we have had this bounty for so long has been because we were able to divide our labor. So one guy is able to get really good, for example, at being an electrician. I'm just picking that arbitrarily. And he's able to really focus on that and get his 10,000 hours in. And he becomes an expert at this. He's able to do that because he doesn't have to go and also farm crops and then also have to milk cows. And then also, there just aren't enough hours in the day for one person to try and do all of that and maintain a civilization, particularly a complex civilization like we have. And when your currency starts breaking down, the people that do these jobs, this is particularly true for foundational jobs, the types of jobs that used to be seen as absolutely essential, right? So, and how do you know if it's essential? One good litmus test you could use would be to say during COVID, it was kind of said, hey, only essential personnel should show up to your job. Well, how many people were considered essential? Now, I'm not trying to give people who were considered non-essential an existential crisis, although I'm sure that that's going to happen or did happen for a little while with some people. But the most essential people seem to be being paid the least. They're doing the most work. And eventually those people start saying, fuck it. I'm really tired of doing this job that I don't like. And I don't mind doing the job, but not if I'm going to be paid very little, that's not commensurate with the amount of effort that I'm putting in, and then insulted, for my troubles. And so you're competent people, and Ayn Rand in her book, Atlas Shrugged, she points out that that's kind of what happens. And I realize that the book itself, I'm not a terribly big fan of her fiction, but she makes her point that the people who are truly competent decide that, well, if I'm not going to make any money, why the hell should I take on any responsibility? Why should I do any of this? Why should I work my ass off for a bunch of people who don't appreciate anything I'm doing? I'm better off just checking out. And I use the example of a dispatcher that I knew years ago, and he had worked his way up to $18 an hour. This was a trucking dispatcher. And the amount of stress that those guys take on a company level. So we're not talking about the wildcats. We're talking about guys who work in a structure. Those guys are under constant stress all day long. They're constantly being yelled at, and they are, time is their enemy. It's the worst. It's a shit job. And he was making $18 an hour, and there was this big push at the time. They were going to do some kind of the rumor was they're going to raise minimum wage $20 an hour. And his point was, listen, if you're going to make minimum wage $20 an hour, unless the company gives me a raise commensurate by percentage, which would have been, I guess, like a 300% raise. So in other words, he would have to go to $45 an hour. He says, unless the company's going to do that, I'm going to quit, and I'm going to go work at a 7-Eleven. I'm going to, why should I care? I don't have to do any piss testing. I can work at a 7-Eleven part-time. I can deliver pizzas and have the same basic life and have nowhere near the stress I got to put up with now. And that's an example of what I mean by the competency crisis. When people realize that if they're not going to be really compensated for their efforts, the most competent people check out and say, forget it. Why would I bother with that?
Yeah. And it's gotten to a boiling point here, because I hear this all the time. You're even beginning to hear it in the white collar tech sector as well. There's people that are working in the tech sector.
What are some examples, if you don't mind my asking, just out of curiosity, because I see it from the blue collar side. Predominantly every business I've owned has been blue collar or retail or something. So I don't have a lot of experience on the white collar side. So I'm curious, if you don't mind.
No, it's really. It seems like an existential crisis of people are predominantly doing either Excel monkey jobs, where they're just putting numbers in an Excel sheet and making reports. It's really monotonous work that doesn't give them a fulfilling life, or
so
they're
not idiocracy, was it Office Space?
Yes.
The mindless sort of drone type jobs, is that what you're referring to?
There's that sales jobs, like if you're cold calling, doing all of that, and you're not really getting fulfilled for it. There's a lot of people, particularly with the rise of TikTok and social media, I think it's a bit misguided. A bunch of people are saying, hey, I'm going to go try and create a social media presence and develop a side hustle and hopefully a career that way, spend time on that, seeing more of that. But it seems like there's, particularly in the white collar side, a lack of fulfillment, even though you're making some money, that is really driving people away from it. Again, the fiat system, print a bunch of money, throw it at a bunch of stuff that really doesn't make sense and probably shouldn't be invested in the first place. And then you're checking the box of I have a job, but it's really not fulfilling you at the end of the day.
Yeah, and fulfillment's important. And that's where I let me harken back to this. So the competency crisis also factors into the guys who used to do, once again, all those jobs that many consider to be, what I hear this term all the time, low skill or low paying, entry level, etc. But the thing is those jobs, once again, they're necessary. People have to do them. If you don't have somebody who is, I use cleaning septic tanks, if you don't have someone doing that, then Well, I mean, there's no way to put it another way. I mean, you have a really big shitty mess in the most literal sense in that example, in that extreme example. And so with the the people that are not that are the fulfillment used to come from being paid, and then your currency wasn't losing value. Certainly not to the level we're seeing now. Like to the tune of probably upwards of 25-30% annually, in terms of real inflation, not this fake CPI bullshit. But and the fulfillment, because obviously you're not going to be fulfilled, cleaning somebody's septic tank, right? I mean, I would not be fulfilled. However, that can be overcome if I have enough money on the other side of that to go do shit that I want to do. And which is, once again, and while I never watched a lot of Mike Rowe's stuff, I'm aware of his existence, and I'm aware of what he talked about. And so one of the things that, for example, in my case, I love flying. I'm a big aviation guy. I would love to see a resurgence in private aviation. Personally, because it would also bring prices down for others if more people wanted to play that game. And so, the cost of flight per hour, is somewhere a couple $100 an hour for private aviation for flight. And like, well, if you can do the stuff you don't want to do, and this used to be the deal. The deal was, I'll show up and I'll work in your sweaty factory, or I'll do whatever job it is that you don't want to do that job, but I will go ahead and do that. But I want to be able to go do stuff I want to do. And now you have people that can't do any of that, right? They're just working. They're showing up to work, and it doesn't make any difference, as you point out, because you're pointing out the lack of fulfillment in the white collar jobs. It's becoming pervasive. It's starting to hit every industry now, where more people are becoming less satisfied. And I think it has a lot more to do with just their currency being devalued to an extent that they can't do anything with it. There's nothing palpable they can do with this money they're being paid. They're being paid, I think there was a Stitch video I did like 2-3 days ago. The guy was talking about, like, why is it people in my comments want an economic collapse? And I answered him, and I said, well, dude, I mean, probably because people are working harder than they've ever worked right now. And they're making more dollars than they've ever made. They're turning more dollars they've ever returned. And their lifestyle is still going backward faster than it's ever gone. And so, so to your point with fulfillment, it's like it's happening kind of everywhere. And I genuinely think it is a currency issue. If you do that. Now, the downside, of course, and I'll go into this in another segment with you, but the downside is, of course, that means that there's a responsibility, meaning that, that prices and wages will come down relative to a hard currency. But I'll go into that a little bit later on.
No, and that's why I'm very happy that you're getting this message out there, particularly on TikTok, because I think people need to hear this. It's because I've seen you talk about this multiple times. The concept of voting harder and voting your way out of this problem is just completely asinine and nonsensical. Yeah. And that's why I dedicated my life to Bitcoin for the last 7 years with this media company. I'm managing partner at a venture firm. We're investing in Bitcoin companies to make it more accessible and usable for individuals, is because we're not going to solve this problem. I've come to the conclusion individually that we're not going to solve this problem from voting in a new boss, Republican, Democrat, really doesn't matter. The way the government debt is set up, they all have to perpetuate that problem. There's really nothing that they can do to stop it, and therefore the currency is going to continue to be debased. And the only way out of this, I believe, is to begin adopting a currency that is outside the control of the state and the central banks, which is Bitcoin. And really driving home to people that you're not going to vote your way out of this, whether it's Biden, Trump, Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, RFK, whoever we get in November. They're not going to fix these problems. You've got to take agency over your life and fix it yourself, and adopting a harder currency, I think, is the most effective way to do that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that not to inject too hard into a political note, although it's almost impossible to ignore the politics of it, because anytime, I was in the gun industry for many years, and in that industry, of course, you can't divorce politics. It's a political business. And, I got my belly full of it years ago, and then of course, as soon as you talk about money or currency, in particular, especially if you're talking about hard currency, and hard currency, not only that, but the hardest currency that's ever been invented, and that is a direct existential threat to central banking as an idea, as a business model. It threatens to pull the power of a lot of people away very quickly. And where it's like you can have your politicians, rattling their saber about, we're going to do this, we're going to have free this, free that, more military spending, more endless wars, and endless welfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you inject hard currency into it, it's asking the direct question. It just says, how the hell are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for all that? I mean, that's great that you have all these ideas, but how do you intend on paying for this? And that's the part that when I point out, like, you can vote for any of these people that are making all these crazy promises to you, and they can't keep any of these. Just like with all the migrants that are coming to the U.S., all the illegals coming across the border, which is a big problem. These people are all. Does anybody out there think that they're being told they're going to eat bugs, live in a pod, and live in a 15-minute prison? Of course not. They're being made all kinds of promises, and there's no way to pay for any of this, with the exception of just printing more largesse. Just creating more money, more counterfeit money, and then shoving it into the economy. And it's in fact, it's actually one of the hardest things I've had to try and explain is inflation. How monetary inflation precedes your price inflation, and it's probably one of the most frustrating topics to try and explain. I mean, it really, and if you've done it for any length, and again, if you've been around the Bitcoin space for a while, you know what I'm talking about. It's very frustrating to try and explain how that mechanism actually works, because so many people have been so abused for so long that it's they were rewarded in school for answering multiple choice questions rather than really truly understanding the subject and source material in a lot of cases. And this is true for all of us, okay? So this isn't me just pointing a finger from the outside looking in. I mean, I was there too. But the topic always gets ignored, and that's the money topic gets ignored. When we learn about, for example, World War I, very briefly, of course, I mean, in school, I mean, any of us Gen Xers, you heard about World War I, it existed, right? But you didn't hear anything at all about, any of the meat and potatoes of it. But what they don't talk about is that every country abandoned the gold standard in Europe, in order to wage that war. So in other words, it was completely impossible for them to have a war and have a hard currency at the same time. That tells us something. And same thing, there was I reference this, and I don't want to overtalk this, but I referenced 1865 in a video that it was very brief, and it was me just pointing out that in the case of the North, slavery notwithstanding, so taking that out of the equation, the South had created a currency that directly competed. The Confederate dollar competed with the Yankee dollar, and that right there was the cardinal sin. That's, in my view, what actually caused the real problem, because the South would then have the privilege of exporting their inflation to the North. Just like, for example, in the case of Putin in Russia, if you want to buy Russian oil and gas, you first have to buy rubles, and this gives them the opportunity to adjust their currency values and make more money off that trade. And it is really frustrating to try and explain this to a large swath of people. 10% maybe of people that follow me really understand this stuff. 20% get it. The rest of folks, they kind of, I think, get it. And this isn't a criticism, by the way. I don't misunderstand. This is hard stuff. And it's deliberately not talked about by media. The only people that you hear talk about this stuff are guys like you in your situation, or maybe the Von Mises people, Jeffrey Tucker and a few others that maybe bring this stuff up. Most everywhere else, it's almost a taboo subject. So yeah, it can be a little frustrating.
It certainly is. I mean, you mentioned Russia. Another good example is Libya. Gaddafi wanted to tether their economy, their currency to gold.
Yeah,
we went in.
He's another one.
Quickly,
he's another one.
We saw, he died. That happened pretty quickly. And it's funny because you'd think people would grasp the importance of the money, because it is literally 1/2 of every transaction that you're involved in throughout the economy. It's the most important tool we use as humans, arguably. And that's why I think
it is.
It's hard for people to grasp, or not hard for people to grasp. I think once you grasp it, I just think the context in which they view money is completely corrupted by the fact that they were just born into this fiat system, and they expect that's the way the world works. They don't understand what a money should be. They were just born and they're like, oh, this is money, and never questioned it. And
yeah, I see this with some of the younger folks that are out there that they're questioning, why do we need money? What is, why are we needing money for something? I see this quite a bit, actually. And it comes from I'm trying to think of how I want to say this, because, like I said, this has been a vexing topic for me for a long time. Money is supposed to be a unit of measurement, a unit of what I would call monetary measurement. And if you've seen, as you mentioned, you've binge watched a few of my videos, and despite some of my rambling, because I do have a tendency to ramble occasionally, it happens when you get a little older. And one of the things that I notice is that I personally noticed is that, so the only currency that you're actually born with is time. It's the only currency that you're given when you hit this world, whatever this shared reality is, this 5 sense reality, whatever it is, okay, for better or for worse, you're here, and we have to make the most of it while we're here. And the only currency we're really given is time, and we don't know how much we have. We make an assumption. We can look at the odds, but we have no guarantees. For some people, that time is very brief, unfortunately. For others, we get 90, 100, 110 years. But it does come to an end. It is finite, just like our existence. Human beings are finite beings. Our existence is finite. Our planet is finite. Everything about us in the physical world, right, which is where I get financial physics from, is because I'm actually dealing more with the physics, the physical existence, as opposed to the philosophical. I mean, though I do go through the philosophical to arrive at the physics, and I do that for reasons that I won't go into here, because that's too long a conversation. But when you concede that time is your currency, you have to be able to measure that accurately. And we're not adding skill to that yet. That comes a little later. That's people who get really good at something. Then you can add a premium for skill. But in the meantime, you still have the transactional nature that exists with time. And so the more accurate your currency is, your unit of measurement, the more accurate your economy will be. And more, because all an economy is just people. It's just people engaged in commerce. That's it. And I'm famous for saying that, like, an economy isn't the NYSE. An economy isn't a building somewhere. It's not the World Trade Center. It's an economy is just everyday people doing stuff every day. Every day we wake up and we go do shit. We buy shit. We sell shit. We do all kinds of stuff, and that's an economy. And the more accurate your money is, the more accurate your market becomes. And especially if you have a zero inflation, if you've got an economy with a currency that has a zero inflation, then all you need to do is just save your money. You don't need to make a big return on anything, actually. You can just save it. And then, in fact, if you have a zero inflation economy, it makes banking near impossible if you think about it, because it gets rid of the idea of the Ponzi scheme idea of interest, which is, again, that's another, I've covered that ad nauseum. I don't know if you want to go into it or not, but that's in terms of banking, when you're printing principal, there is no interest to pay that back. You could do that with gold, for example, because you can always just send somebody out to dig more gold out of the ground and smelt it. But in the case of something like Bitcoin ends that, because you can't mine any more. You've got 21 million coin units, so you've got 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis that exist presumably forever. So you have something that matches the existence of human beings. It's finite. You have something that matches the existence of this reality, right? Whatever it, again, to whatever extent it means, to whatever all this means, if it means anything, it matches it. It matches at least our perception of it, our existence of it, that we as finite human beings understand of it to that extent. Okay, so again, I don't want to get too existentialist, but that's really what it is. And so if people understand that, then they understand that, okay, so why do we need to have money? Well, you have money, for a very simple reason, which it gets even more prosaic, because you're like, well, if you're doing a job and I'm doing a job, we're doing the same job, and then eventually I get lazier and lazier, eventually you're going to resent, that we're doing the same job, I'm getting the same amount of compensation as you are, even though you're doing more of the work. And this is where the idea of money comes in, because it creates this idea of saying, hold on, if someone's actually doing more work and they decide they want to spend more of their time doing more of what somebody needs to have done. So again, I'll go back to our septic tank system. Somebody who's willing to go out and do these really shitty jobs, pun not intended, then they deserve to be compensated. And then they want to be able to use that later on. And that's the whole goal. That's our whole goal for money in general. And unfortunately, this topic, just this very simple conversation that you and I are having right here just in the last 10 minutes, this is not talked about. I don't think there's a university on this planet that has that conversation with anybody that I know of. So you're dealing with almost an outlaw topic. It's really strange that way.
Well, as somebody who's studied economics and got my degree in economics at college, I can confirm that we did not talk about this at all. We were just told about Keynesian policies and interest rate targeting and monetary base expansion and contraction to control the economy and the jobs market and target. And when you think about it too, it's insane. The economy we live in and the mandate of the Federal Reserve is dual faceted: price stability and full employment. And maybe you could throw in lender of last resort when things hit the fan. But the first, price stability. How do they achieve price stability? They achieve it by targeting a 2% inflation rate, inflation rate, which is just double speak in and of itself. So from first principles, if you actually listen to what the Fed is telling you, it's like, yes, our mandate is to stabilize prices. And by doing that, we're going to ensure that they rise by 2% year on year. It's just completely insane.
Right. So they're immediately telling you they're going to create 2% inflation.
Yes.
So you're losing 2% of your spending power, and they're admitting to that right off the bat. And okay, so you're inflating the currency by 2. Let's say for a moment that they were being honest, and it was only 2%. Let's say that was the case, but that's still at the top of the pyramid. It's 2% at the wholesale level, at the beginning at the fountainhead. It's 2%, but percentages are one of these really devious, devilish little things that when you add 2% to 2% to 2% to 2% to 2%, and you go down the ladder of the chain of distribution, before you know it, your prices are either your prices are much higher, or your quality is much lower. It's because it only goes somewhere, right? I mean, you squeeze a water weenie in the center. I mean, you don't lose it. Either explodes, right, or it squeezes out one side or the other side. That's what ends up happening. So it's like, and that's what ends up happening. So I see this with more people. This is why you have a certain segment of the population, a growing number of the population, working harder and harder and harder to keep up with inflation, not just with, the Dave Ramseys of the world. I mean, you probably know my thoughts on Dave. I think that, you should not get a credit card and go buy a jet ski. I agree with him on that. Yeah, sure, we agree on that. But to suggest that people are just lazy or trying to keep up with the Joneses when they're trying to keep up with inflation, that's checked out as far as I'm concerned. That's intellectual dishonesty. At its, in a best case scenario, that's intellectual dishonesty, because that's not the case. Especially when you have younger people that have been sold this bill of goods for a long time. And again, I know if you've seen some of this stuff that I've gone over before, you know that, like, my thoughts on this is that well, it's one thing if somebody makes a bad call. It's another thing if you have the whole of society pitching this idea that you have to go wildly into debt to get an education or to go to a university, and with the idea that that's going to be the shortcut, right? That's what gets sold to people, is this shortcut idea that, okay, if you go to a university, when you get out, then you're going to be able to be put somewhere in the middle of the pyramid, somewhere in the middle of the Jordan Peterson's dominance hierarchy, for lack of a better explanation. But if you don't go, then you have to start at the very, very bottom. Now, that, of course, the idea is that, oh, well, if I go to school, I go get I go to the 4-year drinking contest or something, and I have a giant bar tab at the end of that, then I'm going to start off in the middle somewhere. And more and more people they're finding out they're being disillusioned that was not the case. Just as a Gen Xer, I heard probably 100 times, dude, Axel, just go get a degree in anything, and a company will pay you to, sit in a corner office and do whatever, work that you're, whatever they want you to do. And that's just not the case. More and more people, what is it, 37.7%, I looked at it the other day, of people in America have degrees. Well, that would mean that all of those 37.7% should be making, top tier money, right? But they're not. And in fact, we see it. I'm sure you've seen it too. You have the same internet I have, and you see what it looks like. You see these jobs that are paying, we're paying $15 an hour, and you need to have 4-year degree, and you need to have like 9 years of experience, and on and on. All this like weird fantasy land. It's like reading. It's like reading the text version of some of these girls that want their men to be 6 foot tall and make $600,000 a day, and it's like you guys are just, this is just stupid. Like, where are you getting these numbers from? And that's just it. And it's this raising a bar of these impossible standards that these, and it's an excuse to say, okay, well, we're gonna pay less in terms of dollars, because you'll know that I don't blame capitalism for any of this. I think largely because no one living today has ever seen an honest currency. I don't think anybody alive today has never experienced anything like with with an honest currency wherein you have to pay for something at the cash price, and there's not endless amounts of credit being issued. And by cash price, I don't mean dollars. Just for anybody lest anybody take my words as meaning like paper dollars. I don't mean cash in that sense. I mean cash as in no debt attached to that transaction. In other words, that transaction is final. That if I paid you, for instance, if you want to buy my Jeep, Not going to happen. But if you wanted to buy my Jeep, and I wanted, 0.5 Bitcoin for it, right? That's the cash price. That's it. The transaction is done. There's no more debt attached to that. You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything. After the transaction is over with, we're going our separate ways. And when we have an economy like that, these things can't really happen as easily. These wild speculations and these wild distortions in the marketplace wherein it tells people, to go get a degree in whatever. And it doesn't make any difference what degree it is anymore. I mean, like personally, I don't think it makes any difference. I think there's going to be an influx, by the way, a flooding of STEM, believe it or not. I think that's coming because so many young people now, the younger people, your younger Zoomers now, who all saw what a lot of millennials did, and a good chunk of Gen X, right? Who in the right mind would say, okay, I'm going to go get a degree, so I'm going to take the hardest possible. I'm going to go take astrophysics. Like, dude, no one's going to do that. They're going to take the easiest classes they can get away with because they're just after a degree. They were just told go get any degree, and then we find out that all those degrees are worthless. So now we're going to have this huge flood into STEM. This is the next shoe to drop, as far as I'm concerned. Because what happens if we have engineers? What if we do graduate, another million engineers in 2 years? What are they going to do? What are we engineering? How does the market need a million engineers? Probably not. So then those jobs end up becoming, they by default end up becoming lower wage jobs. Because by virtue of the market's flooded, and then on top of that, the saddest thing is that now you have a bunch of people who've got a shit ton of debt that they can never fucking pay back. I just ran into this anecdotally. A young man that was a friend of my son, good friend of my son's. He's working on his fourth doctorate. What the fuck is he going to do? I can't even imagine how much he owes now. It's probably $500,000, or more. You're never going to pay that back. That's just I just don't even know what to say
Does he realize this?
You got me, man. I when I heard fourth doctorate, my mind just kind of shut down because I was sitting there thinking, what in the world are you going to do with 4 doctorates? And even if you could find something, right, would it pay you enough money to pay back any of, what's the ROI on that? How is that supposed to work? It's just like my criticism of real estate with the real estate bros out there paying $450,000 for a house that after it's all said and done, it cash flows $400. You took $450, damn near $500,000 worth of liability to make $400. You're out of your goddamn mind. Anybody would tell you, you're out of your mind. Any old school, veteran real estate investor would tell you that, dude, that's crazy to spend that kind of money. One of my followers is actually fairly heavy into real estate, and she grew up in real estate. So grew up in, and actually not just real estate, but grew up in developing, land developments, large developments. And she said the same thing. She says, I haven't bought anything in years. Everything is just way too out of control. And the ROIs just aren't there.
Yeah. As somebody, a millennial with 2 young children, currently renting a house. We moved to Austin a few years ago. The real estate market was screaming. And I was like, we'll rent. I'm comfortable renting right now. It just seems way too
So you're just
insane.
over in Austin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good deal. Okay, I'm in Houston, so it's warm today. It's why it's also very humid. So my hair, you can tell the humidity.
Coming from the Northeast, I'm from Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Lived in New York before moving to Austin, and I can tell you, I do not mind 85-degree February days at all.
No. I know what you mean by that. I grew up in Seattle, ground zero for Gen Xers. I grew up there in the 80s and 90s. And I left there and then moved to the eastern side of the state, which is high desert. It's lots of snow, lots of cold weather, and so on. And I stayed there for a number of years before moving to Texas. And yeah, on days when I see some of the stuff this year with the ice on the roads and what have you, even though I have to drive in it, professionally, I still don't mind that I don't have my pipes bursting, at home. So I don't have to worry about that. My wife doesn't have to worry about having to call a plumber because the pipes broke or something like that. So because winter in Houston is like, oh, it got down to 40.
Yeah. And as somebody who spent 5 years in Chicago during college, I think seasonal depression is real. And if you have 90 straight days where the sun doesn't pierce the clouds and it's negative 30 degrees, it's gonna weigh on your psyche.
I've worked many times in Chicago during the negative 20 degree temperature, securing a load of steel. So you're out in the elements the entire time. It's negative 20 and you're having to work in that. And so everything gets done at a snail's pace. And because it's also because everything is slippery. So you have to go very slowly. Otherwise you will probably break a limb or end up,
We lost him. What happened there? Wonder if his browser just cut out. There we go.
Am I back yet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did it skip on your end or was it just my end?
You went dark on our end.
Weird. Okay. Well, I apologize there. I don't know what happened.
It's all good. You were explaining how you have to go slow because you could break a limb.
Oh yeah. Well, that was just because when you're working out there and that with all the snow and ice, yeah. Which again, if you've been in Chicago in that weather, you know what I'm talking about.
It's not fun. Great city, especially during the 100 days of summer that they get. The winter really separates the wheat from the chaff. But speaking of that, mentioning that driving trucks, and what are your thoughts on the global trend of truck drivers standing? Because that's like the broader question that I've been asking a lot of my guests and just really trying to grapple with internally is like, are we at an inflection point where inflation has reached such a point that people are noticing that the political situation is such where people recognize that the options are not as good as maybe they should be or could be? And then thirdly, that the kleptocratic elite that run the world are really trying to shovel us towards this digital surveillance panopticon where we live in the pod. We eat the bugs.
Panopticon that's the word right there.
Yeah, and it
certainly feels that way.
Like, so I'm like internally struggling with like I'm probably, people would describe me listening to the show as an idealist, maybe a bit naive, too optimistic, but I do feel like tides are beginning to turn in terms of awareness, and to solve a problem you have to first recognize that it exists in the first place. And it seems like more and more people are beginning to recognize that there's a problem. I mean, you mentioned it, you see people in their cars complaining about inflation on TikTok every day, and it feels like, particularly after the COVID lockdowns, people are like, wait a second, what the fuck are you guys trying to do here? Back off, like, let me live my life.
Well, the observations are becoming near ubiquitous, and it's at all levels that I'm seeing of the strata, where you've got not just young people talking about this, but there's now even finally starting to hit some of the older generations, some of the boomers, where you've got some of that is even happening, and where there are guys that are saying, hey, what the hell, I can't afford any of the stuff that I was doing 2 years ago. So we're not talking about somebody making a complaint about, I can't afford to fill up my tank with ethyl, in 1975. Now we have people saying, hey, even just 2 years ago, I can't do the same, even close to the same stuff. And so the older folks. So to your question, I need to break that down, actually. Can you go back a tiny bit when you were asking about trucking? You asked the first part of that. Can you go back and let's isolate that?
Yeah, so to me, observing, I go back to the Canadian truckers rally, not being talked about a lot, but it seems like There's a big farmer/trucker rally happening in Europe right now. There was talk of that trucker rally to the border here in the United States last month, but who knows how overblown that was or how much signal is actually there. But it does seem like, at least in pockets of the world, the truckers, the farmers are standing up. The people at the base of our economy who are affected most by the raw input prices on the front end of the economy are standing up and say, hey, something's wrong here. You guys need to take a step back.
You've got a couple of things to unpack with this. So with truckers, and I don't want to go too much into a trucking seminar because I don't know how many people are really interested. Some people are really interested. They're fascinated by truck driving because it is an odd profession. It's a strange profession if you think about it. Here's a guy. You're going to have a guy who's going to drive an 80,000 pound truck down the street. Doing like in my case about 75, 80 miles an hour everywhere I go, and they live in a little box in the back for a period of time. For some cases, for some guys, months at a time. So it's a strange life. So some people are fascinated by it. Others are bored to tears by it. So I'm going to I'll try not to go too far into the boring. But when we look at truckers, you have really roughly two distinctions. You have your owner operators, and then you have company drivers. Now, company drivers are guys who work for another company. Now, there's an offshoot of the company driver, which is called the lease driver. And I don't want to tear into the specifics of that mainly because once again, it'll get boring very quickly. But suffice it to say, a lot of the lease drivers are just glorified company drivers who get to pay for their own maintenance, and their trucks aren't governed in a lot of cases. That's it. That's really kind of the only benefit. Well, your owner operators have maximum freedom. These are your guys, like if you go back and watch old Smokey and the Bandit, from 1978, if I remember right, or Convoy, or any of these old trucking movies back in the day, you'll see that most of it's centered around owner operators. And the reason it is because owner operators had maximum freedom, right? They own their equipment. They own their truck. They own their trailer. They own all their gear. And they are true business owners, right? They're so like in my case, they're a business owner. So for them, they have to treat it like that. Now they have freedom to be able to go do things. For instance, the truck convoy, the truck strike, the go down to the border and do whatever they were going to do down there, or the truck strike for New York, which I covered. That industry has been the bane of of government, of DOT, of just the idea of centralized control. It's been the bane of their existence. And so, in fact, on the broader scale, your owner-operator truck drivers, believe it or not, because logistics, they need to have product go from point A to point B. They have to have that. And if someone is in the middle of that, the driver / owner, he has control over that, over rates. And centralized authorities hate this. They absolutely hate this. They hate that freight is a market that does this. They hate that. They've been trying to get rid of owner operators for decades. The industry, they do everything they can. The latest iteration of this we're seeing is once again the same thing we're seeing across multiple sectors. So not just trucking, but the idea of constantly bailing out and propping up and inflating the balance sheets of large competitors. And, you're probably sophisticated enough to figure out how this is done. You have a bunch of opaque investors, quote investors, that put money into large companies, and so their portfolio, their stock price looks like their company is just fine, even though the company is like wickedly unhealthy. It's massively unhealthy. They fired all their competent people decades ago, and now they're just there because of inertia. Well, that has been the case in the trucking world for a long time. And, they've gotten rid of a lot of guys. The guys who don't have notes on their equipment are kind of okay. But anybody who owes money, particularly in the trucking industry, because the interest rates are not gentle, they're not 7%. They're 29%. They're crazy. The lease rate factors, in fact, that some of the lease drivers make, 29-30% lease rate factor. It's absolutely fucking crazy how much these companies juice everybody for. And so, to your point, the number of owner-operators are dwindling while the number of company drivers are increasing. And this, of course, is also happening because, well, you can get a really cheap guy to throw him in there who hold the steering wheel. Now, these are guys, they don't know anything about trucks. They don't know anything about the mechanics. They don't know anything about tire wear. They don't know anything about the air system in your truck. They don't know any of that stuff. They just know that get in the truck and you're going to point it in this direction and go here, go to this place. And we see that, and of course, I talked about in the competency crisis video. We see it even last night, even as of last night, across the Sierra Nevadas, up in Northern California, you have this huge dump of snow. Well, that wasn't an unknown thing. They had been talking about that, like telling guys, hey, don't go up there, don't take I-80 through through California because you're going to get stuck in 10 feet of snow. And sure as shit, thousands of trucks are stuck up there. Well, yeah, they were told not to go there, but it doesn't matter because the companies that own these guys, right? They tell them, you have to go there. You have got to go do this, or you're fired. And for some cases, you're fired means it also means you're deported. And this type of power is completely antithetical to what you would want to have in terms of a market that functions properly. But when you can control a market like that, well, then you get this shit. And so this is why, of course, I mentioned, in a video I did, I think I did a trucking report video like 2-3 weeks ago or something like that. I mentioned that when the trucker strike was going on, the truckers for Trump or something like that. And I'm not one way or the other on Trump on this one. I wasn't taking sides. I was just pointing out that there aren't enough owner-operators nowadays to really make that big a difference in this. It's not like the 70s, where I want to say 73, if I remember right, the owner-operators out there, the Independent Truckers Association, which was I don't want to say a union, but it was a loose confederation of owner-operators, were protesting the gas taxes, the diesel tax, because they wanted to add a bunch of diesel taxes, and it was punitive. It was really to try and get rid of owner-operators, to bring in more centralized control, to bring in more large companies where they have direct control over everything. They have direct control over the rates. They can do all this kind of stuff. And back then, the guys had a lot more power. They would shut down the entire East Coast. They would just go out there and park their trucks, and you now had to listen. You had to listen to what they were saying now, because you had hundreds of thousands of people stuck in traffic. And of course, a good chunk of them are going to be so-called important people who probably got to take a shit. And so they're stuck in traffic. They can't do anything. Well, now they got to listen. And that doesn't really exist as much anymore. It's still out there to an extent, but not quite as much. And on top of that, of course, you also have a large number of them who were boomers, and many of them retiring. They're just getting out of the industry. They're up in their 70s now, and they're saying, no, I'm going to go do something else. But the rates haven't kept up with any of that. And just, again, given this is a Bitcoin podcast, that's another problem, because the rates are being distorted so heavily that now it's getting almost impossible for owner-operators to turn a profit. A lot of the loads that are getting offered are they would be what we would call them in retail. We would call them a loss leader, because but you can't do that in freight. You have to be able to make a profit, because you have a lot of costs to keep those trucks on the road. Combined with, again, not to bore people, but combined with you have the industry is being flooded. There is no shortage of truck drivers. There has never been a shortage of truck drivers. Back 10 years ago, there was 12 years ago, there was this big thing like, oh my God, we were short 80,000 drivers. Oh my God, what are we going to all do? There was never a shortage. There's never a shortage of 80,000 drivers. There's been tons of guys. What there was a shortage of was a shortage of guys who were willing to work for $6 an hour. That's what there was a shortage of, So there's no such thing as a labor shortage. This is, and if you've seen any of my earlier work, you know my thoughts on this. If a labor shortage existed, that would mean that price gouging existed, and it doesn't. There's no such thing as price gouging, so therefore there's no such thing as a labor shortage. You can't have it both ways, and so to that end, as far as what I think is happening in the industry, I think the industry. We'll see how this plays out, but I think there's going to be more carnage on the road, and I think there's going to be progressively larger and larger insurance claims, and endless lawsuits as a result of just putting anybody behind the wheel of these trucks and hoping for the best, hoping that it'll all work, and then of course the technophile guys out there who don't have any experience in the industry, or in a lot of cases in any industry. I'm not trying to pick on you, but there's some truth for some of these guys. They're saying, well, no, the self-driving trucks, like that's a fantasy, dude. That's a fantasy. That guy went to jail. That battery truck? The guy who was going to do the dude went to jail for fraud. I mean, it's like that he was part of the Forbes. What was it? That 30 under 30 or something like that.
It's a good list to basically find who the next big fraud is going to be of SPF.
It really almost
Elizabeth
is.
Holmes, this guy.
Yep, yeah, and it's like, because it's like, well, no, that technology doesn't really exist, and I think some folks watch a little too much Star Trek and Star Wars and think that, like, no, dude, there's thermodynamics, man. There's physics and thermodynamics you got to throw into this, and if there was a way around all this stuff, somebody would have done it a long time ago. It's a very clever. It's like, what's the name? Maybe you know this. I cannot for the life remember the chess playing machine. It was the Turk or
Watson?
Something like that.
No, not Watson. That was you could answer questions on Jeopardy. What do you say, Logan? Something blue. Logan will look it up.
No, not Big Blue. There was it was a machine. It was in I want to say in the 13 or 1400s that somebody invented in it, and it was called the Mechanical Turk, I think is what it was called.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was what it was actually a guy inside the box doing all of this. It wasn't a machine doing this. It was a guy that was playing chess, and it turned out that the guy who invented it was just paying chess, like these world-renowned chess players. He was paying them money to get in on the hustle. That's all it was just a con. And that's how I see a lot of the so-called self-driving trucks and all. It's like, dude, it's a hustle. You're taking a bunch of people that come from the tech world, and they have a lot of money. They've made, these young people have made a lot of money in tech, but they don't have a lot of experience outside of tech. In the physical world, in that sense, and so they don't know what it's like to cross, the continental divide on a sheet of ice in a semi truck, and all that goes along with all. They know majority of people have never done that, so they play on ignorance, and so there we go.
No, it's really leading me to a state of dismay because being in the Bitcoin industry, I've been involved in Bitcoin mining. I was one of the first team members of a company called Great America Mining. We did flare gas mitigation up in the Bakken and upstream oil and gas well pads. We would take the gas that would otherwise flare, run it through a generator, and mine Bitcoin with that right on the well pad. And through that experience, I have a finance and a little bit of a tech background, but it was a baptism by fire into the world of energy and how it works. And so I've been on that educational journey in getting up to snuff on how the energy sector works, and just hearing like that, like Otto thinking that you can have a fleet of electric trucks is just insane. Like, not only the fact that there probably isn't enough lithium on Earth to develop the batteries that would be necessary for that, but then like the logistics, like how long is it going to take to charge all these trucks, and what's the backup going to be like at these charging stations and things like that. These knock-on effects that people really don't think about.
It's unless you have done it, you don't think about it. And that's just like pointing out, like, I would have no idea if I, like, in terms of energy production, if I went there too, I might see some stuff that there's a little bit of crossover in terms of like some of the physical stuff. But having never done it, like, I mean, I'd actually have to do the job for a while personally to really understand it and get something from it. Especially before I invested in it, but once again, if you're playing on people's ignorance, then, ignorance is one of those things, right? It's not really your fault. You don't know what you don't know. So yeah, there's that.
Quick break here, freaks. This rip is brought to you by Gradually Then Suddenly, a framework for understanding Bitcoin as money by Parker Lewis. I wrote the foreword to the book. I'm honored to have done so because it's the best 0-to-1 primer if you're looking for a logical explanation of why Bitcoin obsoletes all other money. Buy one for yourself and maybe a few for your friends. Go to thesafehouse.com/gradually. That's thesafehouse.com, safe spelled SAIF, thesafehouse.com/gradually. Use the promo code TFTC for $5 off at checkout. Buy it now, freaks. The price of Bitcoin is going up. You need to understand it. This is the best 0-to-1 primer. Back to the show. Yeah, it's just like this competency crisis comes back and back. And there's so many areas of our economy where it exists, whether it's the trucking industry, seeping into the airline industry, like the energy sector again, it's all driven by bad incentives. You print all this money. Yeah. You say, hey, we're going to transition to this green economy so people don't go get petrochemical engineering degrees, and you have this buildup of physical technical debt in the energy sector side. This exists in the housing market as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Charles Marone and his Strong Towns concept and his book Strong Towns, but in that book he basically explains like the easy money that led to the development of sprawling suburbs filled with cheap houses.
Yeah.
Like you have a bunch of
prior to 2008, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have like a bunch of infrastructure that's been built out, and it's building up this physical technical debt that is going to need to be dealt with, like sewer and plumbing systems that need to be maintained and updated over the years. Like all of this I think stems from easy money, the zombie companies that are allowing people to basically perturb the trucking industry. Like, we're building up this massive technical debt in many different areas, whether it's intellectual debt, physical infrastructure debt. It's pretty scary.
It's a theory that I have about the industrial revolution. It's a theory that I actually kind of have, in that the amount of largesse that it took to fuel that, there is no possible way that there was that much gold or currency. There was no way that there was that much gold on deposit to cover as much currency as was printed to fuel all of that. The enormity of it all, and I don't think that was possible. I don't think so. I personally don't think that's the case. I think that a lot of the gold got moved and we know historically this kind of thing happened, where you would have gold move from bank to bank to bank to bank, trying to outrun the regulators. So when the regulator gets there, he counts the gold again, and it's the same bars. And so, and not to just harp on the Bitcoin thing, because but it's true in Bitcoin, it ends that shit. There's no double counting Bitcoin, right? It's gold is in fact more fungible than Bitcoin. It is. That's actually somewhat bad, in my opinion, because of that very issue, because you can end up counting the same bar of gold twice. Now, I don't care how many serial numbers you put on it. You can melt that gold down and put another serial number on it. So it's like you can just keep counting the same gold over and over and over. That is not the case with Bitcoin. Bitcoin ends that shit like a motherfucker. It ends all of that shit. And I think that that's actually quite terrifying. It really is one of those things where when I saw that the Michael Saylor interview, what was it, Tucker Carlson did, and I sent that interview to friends, who ask about Bitcoin. I'll send them that. I'll forward that on to them, and I'll point out, like, this ends all of this. It ends a lot of madness here. Now, it also ends a lot of jobs. It also ends a lot of illusion of wealth, which I talk about quite a bit. I mean, if you followed me for any length of time, you know that I talk about the illusion of wealth all the time, because it is an illusion. A lot of what we're seeing is like, this wouldn't exist. Now, you can say, well, instead of what? Well, I don't know, an honest economy, and prices coming down, and lifestyles increasing. Many hands make light work. And if you have an honest currency and an honest economy, excuse me, and if you have that, then you have an opportunity to really have a true, accurate assessment of what your time is worth. And then I think that's where, and I think that follows it all the way back up to what you've been talking about this whole time, not just competency, because you want a hierarchy of competency. You want your most competent people to be able to feel as though they can be competent and not be punished for it. Because we see that happen. And I'm sure if you've been in corporate America at all for any length, you've seen this. The most competent person, if they do something that's, they can be punished for it, just for doing that. It's sort of like it's the asking for forgiveness and asking for permission, right? I mean, I think that, I think our founders saw that as probably supreme in their existence, where, like, in America, the idea being that you shouldn't have to ask for permission to be human, nor should you have to ask for forgiveness. And I think that it corrects that. That's where, and I really think that it's why I don't give a shit how much Bitcoin goes to. What is it, like 67,000 or something like that, 68,000 or something like that now today? I don't care. I mean, like I think that it needs to replace fiat, and by doing so, to your point, I think that it will correct that competency issue, if we correct it in time. Now, the scary part is, in my opinion, will we catch it in time while people still know how to maintain all of this infrastructure that we've built? So we've built all this massive infrastructure. Will we catch it in time to where we can still maintain all that shit?
That's the big question. That's what worries me too. Is because we are in a race against time, and again, going back to like the perverse incentives of the green transition. Like, we could wake up in a generation and not have enough petrochemical engineers or drilling teams to actually go get the oil and gas, which we're going to need into perpetuity. If you're listening and you don't believe that, you're absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
but
no, you're right.
The economic incentives are so corrupted right now that you're disincentivizing people from going to learn these extremely important skills. And I mean, nuclear as well. I think we should be spinning up as many nuclear power plants as possible, but due to the NRC and the red tape they've thrown on the industry since the 70s, we don't have any competent, or we do have some, but arguably not as many as we need in terms of people who can actually build and then run a nuclear reactor.
And run them safely. And it's interesting you bring up nuclear, because I have a good friend of mine that is big pro-nuclear power, and I am, for lack of a better term, anti-nuclear power, but not for the reasons that people think. It isn't because I don't think it's efficient. I understand the physics behind it. I absolutely get that. I question the ability going forward, especially, unless things change, right? If we continue down this once again, competency, if we continue down this road, I think adding nuclear power to this, and then of course, how do you dispose of your waste and so forth? I mean, you have a lot of, nuclear power has its downside as well, and it requires not just skill, but it requires a fairly hefty amount of competency to not only build but to maintain that shit for a long period of time. And if we lose that, then we end up kind of dooming future generations with something they have no idea what it could be doing to them. It's the only. I just wanted to comment on this because you're one of the first folks that have ever brought that up, and I wanted to point that out. There was like that. What do they call that? I don't spend a lot of time in the corporate world, so I don't. DE&I. That's what it is. Where you're hiring people based on like completely physical characteristics that have nothing to do with their ability to do a job accurately or safely, and that's the only challenge that I have with it, is because the long-term repercussions of what happens if we as a society forget how to manage all this shit. What happens to folks that are now handling fissionable material that they could be irradiating people, like what that kid, what's his name? Oh God damn it! That kid who built a reactor in his backyard. I don't know if you read about this.
He's got like the crazy hair, right?
I don't remember. He was a young man, and he was a Boy Scout, and he went to get his nuclear power badge, and it was supposed to be just a learning thing where you learned about it. He took it to the next, like beyond the next level, and started getting his hand on fissionable material through a whole bunch of just corporate incompetency. Got a hold of fissionable material. Now he's irradiating the whole neighborhood by doing this, right? I mean, and he actually did die. Unfortunately, I want to say, but it was from alcoholism. Actually, it wasn't from, but the radiation. But you could see his skin. I mean, he was fried. He fried himself. And I cannot, for the life of me, remember if
David
you have
Hahn.
That's who it was. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating story. And here was a guy that here was someone who was supremely competent. Like supremely competent. How many 19-year-old kids build a nuclear reactor, right? I mean, unsafe as all hell, but how many people would do that, right? He wasn't even 19. He was like maybe 16 or something like that. Well, how many people have the ability to do something like that? And yet nobody had the presence of mind to hire this young man and say, hold on, let's you got everything down, let's hire you. Nobody had the presence of mind to do that. Yeah. Because competency recognizes competency. And if you have a whole bunch of incompetent goddamn managers, and people that are in there,
which is what our economy runs on right now, the managerial class.
It does. It's and like I said, to your point, it is a bit scary where some of this is going, because you have to wonder, how is this going to play out? And then of course, compounding that is birth rate. Mm-hmm. What is it, 1.64? And that's what the current numbers show, 1.64. I would be willing to bet that it'd be 1.4, but then, or 1.43 or something like that. Next time the demographers actually, or the statisticians and demographers get together and they figure out what the birth rate is per female, and well, that's not good. What is it? Japan is doomed as a country at this point now. They would have to. They'd have to have every woman there, like, out to here with a kid, for the next 10 years to bring those numbers up. And it's because of this fiat problem. Fiat causes this. This is so destructive, what it does, because it creates, once again, these weird illusions of wealth. And then, as we all see on the internet, we see the delusion calculator, right? The girls that are being interviewed. What do you want in a man? And they all say this ridiculous shit that isn't even possible. It's like, dude, that doesn't even exist. Like you're asking for, you've got like 80% of women chasing like 5 guys. It's like seriously, you can name them practically. Like Elon Musk, DiCaprio, and like 3 other guys. It's the same fucking guys. They're all chasing. Nobody else is in that position, right?
I saw a bell curve distribution of women versus men, like on a scale 1 to 10. Like, who could you see yourself marrying? Like, could you marry a 5? Could you marry a 10? Like, 95% of girls wanted a 9 or a 10. Where you had a nice bell curve distribution for the men, where it's like more realistic.
Yeah, I can't remember where that was either. I know the story you're talking about. It was from Match.com or one of the dating sites, Tinder or something. It was one of the dating sites that they did they were able, because they had that data. Of course that's who would have that data, and they look at it, and most men are pretty even-handed with it. They're like, I'm a 6 on a good day, so I'd be good with a 5 or a 6 girl. And but like all the women wanted to have, like, they all wanted 9s and 10s. Yeah. It is strange.
It is. Yeah, we are very different people, and that's the thing. Like things like DEI and ESG initiatives try to ignore these very stark differences in the psychological makeup of men and women, which is just insane.
It creates a huge distortion, and that has been, once again, going back to your Fiat, or the topic of Fiat. That's what I keep seeing. The more, in my case, so I can only speak for myself on this. I can't speak for anybody else. But I mean, I think anybody in the Bitcoin space, who's seriously not just trying to have Bitcoin go up so they can buy exotic cars. I don't give a fuck about that. But anybody who sees it for what its potential is, as a alternative to a fiat currency that has fungibility, but not so much fungibility like gold, that you can actually keep a very accurate measurement. I think that that is what will correct a lot of this. I really do. Because of so much distortion that has happened within the marketplace, and again socially, just like you may have heard me mention this, the idea of social mobility. So social mobility is supposed to be a two-way street. It's not just supposed to be where you're working your way up. You also have people that are coming down, and we have a frozen economy in that right now we have an awful lot of people that are holding on to all this enormous amounts of largesse. It's caused an enormous distortion in the marketplace. It's caused this huge gap between rich and poor that shouldn't exist and didn't exist before. And this is not a socialist rant. It's really not. This is, as a free market guy, the more you bail this out, the worse this is going to get. And it's these people not willing to take the L and realize that, like, you gambled big and you let it ride, but you let it ride to the extent of you lost sight of the reason why it is you wanted money in the first fucking place. Dickens does a good job of this. Charles Dickens, he in his book A Christmas Carol, and I love breaking this book down. The movie's easier to break. There's any one of like 50 movies they made about the book, but we all know the story of Scrooge. That's exactly what it seems like a lot of the world has turned into right now. And once again, like I said, this is not an anti-free market rant. I'm speaking from a very specific free market. The free market punishes hogs, right? What's the old saying? Pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, and that's really seems to be what we've distorted. We've created this distortion where the hogs are not getting slaughtered; they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's no natural consequences. Whereas in an actual free market, that's actually punished to do something like that. It's like hugely punished, and you're punished with failure. You're punished with your outgo exceeding your income, and then your upkeep, of course, is your downfall. And that's the part that's missing. So in the case of Dickens, he does this really good job of using a character, a fictional character like Scrooge, who is after money for the sake of money. He's not even making his life good with it, right? He's not even making himself comfortable with it. He's just after money for the sake of money, which is the most absurd pursuit that you could ever have. That's an illness. If you're just after that, the reason we all work for money is so that we can exchange it for what it is that we want to do. We want, presumably, the reason you earn a living is to live a life, right? That's we presume that's what we want. But at what point do we say, okay, most of us, I think, most normal people, once we get to a certain point, we max out, right? And you may have heard me say this before too. Beds only get so big and soft. Cars only ride down the right-hand side of the road so nice. Houses only get so big and beautiful. And pieces of ass only get so good-looking. At a certain point, you top out of all of this, and you then go, okay, well, hey, let's go do something else. Let's raise decent families. How about that? Let's raise the next generation to be, good kids. And because in my view, that's where the real legacy comes from.
Another thing that Fiat destroyed, the strength of the nuclear family.
It gutted it, completely gutted it. It doesn't even it's not even recognizable now. Especially figuring that even prior to the Federal Reserve, what did a house cost? $3,000. What is it now? It's 100 times, more than 100 times that now.
1,000 times.
Yeah. You're in Austin. Oh my God. Houses over there are crazy. Or at least they were for a while. I don't know how it is right at this very moment, but for a while, Austin was just nuts. I don't even where do you even get the money to buy these places? Holy shit.
It's come down from the top, and I think it will come down more. I was talking to somebody. They're building so many goddamn apartment buildings in the city. There's about to be an influx of close to 1 million units over the next 5 years, which
Jesus Christ, wow,
which is insane.
Yeah, and who wants to rent any of this stuff? It's another very destructive thing. You don't want to have a bunch of people. The United States was never designed or intended to be a nation of renters. It was never designed for that. The founders didn't envision that you're supposed to be just renting perpetually. They would have thought property taxes, that would have been a hanging offense, to even suggest property taxes. Are you kidding? That was completely against the idea.
Yeah. Let's see. That's one of the memes that's been going around in the libertarian Austrian circles is do you actually own your house if you're paying property taxes?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
And that needs to be dealt with. That is a problem. It really is.
Yeah, it's surprising moving to Texas, no income tax, all that, but property taxes is the big thing down here. It's I thought Texas would be better than the lean on property taxes.
And with and property taxes, income tax, property tax, and death tax, I consider those to be almost unforgivable. That those have been imposed on anybody, because those are right out of the Communist Manifesto. They're so incredibly punitive, and they give once again it takes away, it robs from your legacy, and I think it's just really problematic. Those three should be dealt with. There's just no, and it requires again largesse to keep that shit going.
Yeah, and I do think Bitcoin fixes this, and I do want to wrap up.
Yeah.
By expanding on the comment that you said earlier, I agree. Yeah. I think Michael Saylor has done an incredible job of helping educate people about Bitcoin, but I do agree with you and disagreeing with him that Bitcoin is just this inert asset that is a hedge against the melting ice cube of the US dollar. We need to be using it as a transactional currency. And for some reason or another, I imagine for Michael Saylor being the CEO and one of the largest shareholders of a publicly traded company, has to be particular with his words. There's a lot of people in the Bitcoin space that have a lot of Bitcoin that are afraid to say that Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar. They try to use less aggressive language, and who knows whether they truly believe that or it's a way to sort of hold the government at arm's length and say, hey, we're not competing with the dollar, but intuitively, and in their mind, they think in the long run, yes, it will replace the dollar, but they can't say that because if you're too obvious with it up front, the government will fight back. But I'm not afraid to say it. Like, I think it needs to wholesale replace the dollar as the monetary base money than the transactional currency. And I do think that is going to happen as well. You shouldn't be afraid to say that.
I think you're probably right about Saylor in that because of fiduciary responsibility laws, he probably can't come out and just point blank say that, because if of course, if his company, he has investors and they could sue him if they could probably allege something about like, well, you're deliberately trying to tank the company or something like that, or manipulate your earnings by who knows what they could. There's what is it? There's 80 or 90 million laws on the books now. So who the hell knows what they could invent as some reason to haul him into court and cost millions of dollars and 5 years of his life, arguing about something like that. So you're probably right. But that's what it is. To your point about, because I still see a bunch of folks saying that Bitcoin can't be replace the dollar, and I disagree with this. I think that no, I mean, obviously from the technical side, you've got first tier, second tier, but there's nothing that says that you can't do your settlements. This is where, of course, I'm not big on third parties, but if you're going to have third parties, I would think that this would be one of the few spaces, one of the few items that, because unlike gold, it isn't as fungible, and because it is specific and fairly trackable, in that if I send your company, you're a company that is an aggregator, and the settlements you're doing are monthly. So in other words, as a consumer, I'm out spending my sats, for example, like dollars and cents. I'm spending those in the marketplace, and I'm using my card. And at the end of the month, as an aggregate, we settle that. And I think, and that way to keep the fees as low as possible. So that way you're not just having to do constant fees and have to run the network ragged. That part is where I think that maybe your third parties, maybe there is room for third parties on this, on a small scale. Obviously, Bitcoin doesn't require third parties, but maybe in this case, in terms of day-to-day stuff where you're aggregating, even at the end of the day, for example, that maybe there is a case for some of the third parties. But then, of course, there's also a way to keep, there's a mechanism, because by virtue of the way that Bitcoin functions, you have an ability to audit that anytime you want. You don't have to wait for a banking regulator and then worry if he's on the take. You have the ability to regulate this stuff, right there. Everybody does. So if I spend 50,000 sats, in a month, for example, on personal lifestyle or whatever it is, and then I settle that up, like an American Express bill, for example. Full disclosure, I don't own any part of American Express. I'm just saying that is their business model. Well, that would be, to me, it would seem like that would be where you could make it fairly simple to where you could have Bitcoin being used in day-to-day transactions and everyday stuff that normal people engage in all the time. Although, because, and I'll kind of close with that stuff, but although, when a hard currency like Bitcoin or something, because we've never seen anything like this, I'm really curious to see what the economy would look like in a Bitcoin world. I would love to see it, because I think it'd be really fascinating. And I think it'd be very fascinating to see how transactions change. And what I mean by that is the amount of day-to-day spending that may not happen as a result of the currency not being devalued. So, because, my theory is that attention spans follow money printing. The faster you print money, the shorter attention spans get, because people are incentivized to spend their money fairly quickly. And whether they know it or not, consciously, it seems to happen. And then, of course, the algorithms feed all that back to us, and of course, and it just creates this vicious downward spiral of, people have the attention span of a goldfish. And I think that would change, because I really do think it brings back long-term thinking to people, where they start thinking about, not just legacy of money, no, not just that, but legacy of what kind of world you are leaving. So because it does go outside of just the mere dollars and cents to me. But we have to fix the money first, and then it's much easier to focus on all these other problems that have been ignored for eons. These are real problems. They've been around for a long time, but we just don't think about them because we're too busy trying to survive.
Yeah, stuck on the hamster wheel.
Yeah,
Axel.
Yeah,
you're speaking my language. I think we align pretty much perfectly on all these topics that we've talked about, because
well, I hope I wasn't boring.
No.
I try not to be.
Not at all. I think it's hard for you to be boring. You may think you're coming off as boring, but I can assure you did not. This was a fascinating conversation, and hopefully the first of many, because I think things are going to evolve pretty quickly, and I think the way in which you break down all these problems and explain them is extremely cogent and helpful.
Thank you.
Even to myself, as somebody who's seeped in the understanding the fiat world, what Bitcoin presents as an opportunity. I think going as deep as you do in a lot of these problems has illuminated me to just the extent to which we've completely fucked up the world. But we can fix it. I think we can fix it.
If you don't mind my asking, what is something that you found that was interesting? This isn't for my own self-aggrandizement. This is just so that way I know, because I'm always curious how someone found what I was saying or thought that something I was saying was interesting. I'm always curious, like what, because I don't think about it that much, right? I mean, like, and my wife is tired of hearing about it. She's heard me say this shit for 20 years. So, so for her, she's numb to all of this now. She can say all this stuff in her sleep now, but I'm curious what, if you don't mind, what you found to be interesting, or that it was something that was specific to you.
I think your takes on real estate really, I had the intuitive sense that this house flipping and going to insane amounts of debt and making $400 a month after going $500,000 into debt, it doesn't make sense the way you break that down. But I think more generally, broadly speaking, TFTC stands for Truth for the Commoner. And I think for most of my life, this fiat world has fed us the idea that the experts know best. And I think what you do, whether you're in your shed or your garage, or maybe that's the back of your truck.
This is my garage, actually.
Yeah.
It's my messy garage right now. I was doing oil changes yesterday, so
I think it's optics, because I think the way I connected with you is like, hey, this is the common man working a blue collar job, explaining problems that most people think can only be explained by the expert class, doing it better than many of those so-called experts. And I think
thank you.
The form of your content is such that it could inspire, it certainly inspired me to be like, hey, if this guy in his garage who's a high school dropout can understand and explain these problems, maybe it's not the experts that have all the answers. I think that's very inspiring, and hopefully for others instills a sense of confidence that, like, hey, maybe I can figure this out. Maybe I don't have to be dependent on an expert to feed me the answers. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the hope I have for anybody that's actually follows my research. Because I mean, everything I do is in the field. I don't. There was an anthropologist. I cannot for the life of me remember his name, but he was a field researcher. So, and he was a British field researcher, and he'd always had a bit of a problem with a lot of the academic researchers, because he's like, look, by the time as a field researcher, when I find all this stuff and I go through all of these things out here in the real world, by the time at academia, it's 20 years old. that information, by the time it actually gets there and it starts getting filtered through peer-reviewed study after peer-reviewed study and blah, 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 the time it gets boiled down, it's 20 years later. And so you're on, you try to be on the cutting edge in the field, because that's where you're going to find everything. That's where you're going to see all the real stuff. And of course, nowadays you can't even really trust the internet anymore, as we've seen with Google recently. You can't trust anything. Who the hell knows? Like whenever someone looks up a statistic, I almost go, why bother? Who knows if that stat is real? Who knows? These things can be just made up for all we know. And I mean, we want to try and find good source of information, but I think the best source of information you have is just living your own goddamn life and looking around going, my God, I mean, my neighbors aren't doing anything with for example, my neighbors aren't fixing their house, and I can't afford to fix my house, as an example. I'm just giving this just as an example here. I'm not saying anything specific. I'm just saying, like, that's reality that we're looking at. That's the actual reality, as opposed to what the experts on TV, the Paul Krugmans of the world, are telling us. They're like, oh no, look, inflation's gone away. We've defeated inflation. The fuck you have?
Yeah.
Because
don't believe your lying eyes, Axel. Don't believe your lying eyes. That's what they're telling you. It's like, hey, I know you're seeing your neighbor's house is dilapidated and they're not fixing it, but you're lying to yourself.
I have, in my other business, I install and maintain generators, electric power generators for people, and I deal with customers that are living in like $2 million houses, for example, and they don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. They're insanely broke. They're hyper broke. I don't know how the hell they live in these houses. Because of that, and you have people like, and they make up every crazy excuse in the world, and then argue. I'm not kidding. I actually had a customer argue about $100 difference in price after spending 2 hours telling me how much money he made at some executive job. Like, really? You're seriously arguing? You're going to grind the tits off this to the point where we're arguing about $100? It's costing me more than $100 to stand here and listen to you argue with me about that. Are you fucking kidding me? Like that, but that's real shit. Like, it's just bizarre. So no, when I see that kind of stuff, I don't believe any of this shit.
Yeah. The illusion of wealth is real, freaks.
It is. I think it is completely an illusion. I think more people out there pretend to be something that they're really not at all. And yet if you were to really dig, it's social media, of course, you know how this works. I'm not trying to monopolize your time, but social media feeds into that, where you've got the picture that somebody takes. They take like 60 or 600 pictures until they find the perfect one, and they post that one, right?
Yeah.
Or they have the picture in the background of some exotic vacation that they went on one time 10 years ago, and they would have you believe that's their everyday life. Like, that's just not the case.
That's the hyper real, if you will.
Yeah. Hyper realism is a good way to look at that. That's a great way to look at that and stuff. By the way, I'm thankful that you had me on your show. It's a pleasure. And so, I like I said, I hope I wasn't too terribly boring, and hope people
you weren't at all.
It.
You were so non-boring that I would love to do this again. Maybe in person.
Yeah.
Maybe we can make this happen.
Yeah, that's fine.
Not too far.
Yeah,
from each other.
if you're over in Austin, that's not that far. I travel all over. I'm usually hauling ass all over Texas doing something. So, and hauling something. So it's not a problem at all. So sometime, if you want to, just schedule. I need at least a good 2 weeks notice on something like that. Okay.
I'll be sure to give you good notice. Yeah, you'll have to come by. So I work out of the studios in the Bitcoin Commons in Austin.
Okay.
And so we've got a bunch of companies building in the Bitcoin space, and I'm optimistic that we're going to build the infrastructure that gets us away from this fiat madness, because if we don't, the world's going to collapse in and of itself, because we have a massive competency crisis, a massive delusion of what the real wealth in the world is, and I don't know, Bitcoin gives people agency, which gives me a lot of hope, and I think people are beginning to recognize that avenue towards agency, which is good.
I think you're right, and I'm hopeful with you on that. I'd like to think that we're making a difference, kind of one person at a time, because it is going kind of slowly, but at the same time, It is picking up traction, and I am glad to see that more people are starting to ask questions. That's actually the biggest thing, and which is why I don't mention. If you'll notice, I don't mention a lot of Bitcoin and a lot of stuff that I do. Mm-hmm. It's because I'm more interested in trying to draw people in to the idea of at least ask questions. If they can ask questions, they'll eventually figure it out. They'll figure it out on their own. People are smart; they'll figure it out. If they start asking the question of like, what the hell? Why the hell is it I'm working 70 hours a week and my life sucks? That's all it takes. That first question. Now I got you. Now I can say, well, why do you think that is?
Your money's fucked.
And we can go, yep, that's exactly right. It's because your money's becoming worth less and less and less. And if we can fix that, we solve a shitload of other problems.
Fix the money, fix the world.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. Axel, I can't wait to do this again. Thank you for your time. Please. You were not boring at all.
If how do I get a copy of this, by the way?
I'll send
the
it
recording.
To you.
Will you? Okay, please. Thank you. I'd really appreciate it because I'd love you to use a few pieces and stuff and post them here and there too.
Yeah, we'll send a Dropbox link.
Awesome. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Peace and love, freaks.